Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joining. We're so glad to have you here for this webinar on navigating the global remote workspace. We are going to get started shortly. The room is filling up and it's filling up fast. We are really excited to have you here. I'm Jennifer Bongora, Nexford University's Director of Career Innovation. If you want to let us know in the chat where you're joining from and something that you are excited about, just to build our community with one another, you can put that in the chat. Otherwise, we're going to wait another moment or so as the room's filling up. We have people joining from around the world. Of course, the topic I'm sure would entice anyone to join, but it looks like we have people in the room from Nigeria, Kenya. I'm joining from Malawi. We have South Africa in the house, Cote d'Ivoire. Really happy to have you here. It's going to be a great webinar. I am super excited for our guests that have made the time to join. We have Ghana here. Welcome, Ebenezer. From Canada. From France, bonjour, bienvenue, Philippines. It's fun to see sometimes how many countries we can get in the room. We have Switzerland here, Rwanda, Italy. It's super exciting. Really happy to see everyone here to learn about something that many people are excited about, to gain a better understanding of how to navigate global remote work. So I think our room is filling up nicely, so we can go ahead and get started. Let me just close and open the things that we need. So I'll ask my, we have Mozambique. Hello, you're not too far away from me. Our panelists can go ahead and come on video if they like. We're gonna get started. I know that I get excited for all of our webinars, but honestly, this is a topic that we have had a lot of interest in. So I'll give a brief introduction to who I am, why we're here, and introduce our guests, or turn it over so they can introduce themselves, and then we will get started. So hi, my name is Jennifer Bongora, and I am Nexford University's Director of Career Innovation. As you may know, Nexford University is a licensed American university based in Washington, D.C., and our mission is to build socioeconomic mobility by improving access to high-quality education at scale. So if that's exciting to you, then you're in the right place. A little housekeeping before I turn it over to our panelists is we will have time for Q&A. So please use the Zoom feature that says Q&A at the bottom. Put your questions there. I think the chat will probably be lively throughout. So put your questions in the Q&A and we can keep an eye on them there. And we welcome your interaction and any questions that you have. I think that covers it. You will get a copy of the recording, so you don't have to worry about that. We'll send that after the webinar, along with any resources that we reference. So I am thrilled to have Katarina Miranda and Wei Barkan join us today. I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, give us a little background on who they are, why they're here, and why they care about remote work, and maybe I know, Wei, you've been sharing this, but what's one of the best things about remote work as you share in your introduction? And so, Wei, I'll turn it over to you first.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay? I want to make sure my sound is fine. Okay, perfect. So as Jennifer mentioned, my name is Wei Barkan. So I'm a Liberian American. Both of my parents were born and raised in Liberia, West Africa. I myself and my brother, we were born in the United States, but I recently relocated to West Africa. I live in Dakar, Senegal now. So I've been working remotely since 2016, so pre-COVID. I feel like I'm one of the originals. More recently here, there's been a huge shift to remote work because of COVID-19, but I've been doing it since 2016. Currently, we recently just started a company that's actually helping to bring remote jobs to the African continent. It's called Internally. And yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But I think for me, the biggest thing that remote work really does for your life is open you up to a lot more opportunity than otherwise is possible. And so a lot of people talk about the flexibility, how fun and like you can like work in your pajamas if you want, or like work from bed. And that's great. But I think the most important thing is what it does for your life as far as opportunity goes. So I look forward to talking about that. And yeah, that's my introduction.
Thank you so much. And if we'll send, if it's all right, links so that folks can follow you all on LinkedIn, because both of these panelists share incredible insights, and you'll keep learning from them after the webinar if you follow them on LinkedIn. So Katarina, over to you.
Hey there, nice to meet you all. Meet you. My name is Katarina. I work in the sales team of the company called Remote, which sometimes is a bit tricky because the name of the company might suggest that we're just talking about remote work, but it's actually the name of the company. Basically, we help companies hire legally in any country around the world. And as Wei says, it's not just about working from home, as everyone seems to sometimes connect the remote work as in working from home. It is about changing lives, actually. So there's this one sentence that we say all the time, which is talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. So the work is actually to deliver the opportunities to where all this talent is and to make it easier for people to find it and for companies to employ. And that is it. I'm very happy to be here and thank you for the invitation.
That's wonderful. I think everyone, again, a must follow is the company Remote, because if you are interested in remote work, then they are sharing a lot of insights and statistics and trends in the space. So it's really great to have you here and we appreciate your time. So I think to set the stage, we hear now, especially following COVID, and we hear about remote work, right? And yet we all know that remote work is not the same everywhere. So I'd love to hear maybe just your impressions or your definitions of the different types of remote work that you see available, and maybe some of the pros and cons of the different types. You have fully, global remote, you have remote within certain countries, you have hybrid. And, if you could just talk about what you've seen and what that means in the work that you do. So Wei, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because I've actually done a couple of those. So the first time I was working remote, I actually was part of mainly, it was not distributed at all. Like the headquarters were New York City, and I was sent out to California and San Francisco actually to launch basically our second location. And so I was remote in the sense that like it was mostly just me until I built out the team. And I did a lot of traveling across the West Coast of the country. And then more recently here, I've actually been like global remote, fully distributed, even super flexible as well, where the company didn't care what time you worked. So for example, sometimes I would stay up all night until 6 a.m, go to sleep all day, and then wake up and start working again. So it was a lot more flexible, a lot more free. Whereas when I was in California, because most of my team was on the East Coast, I was having to wake up early, and it felt a little bit more restrictive than what I'm doing now. It's a good distinction because it's important to think about where the rest of your team is, what is the style of work for the company, what systems do they have in place in order to enable remote work, because that's going to vary from company to company, and that's going to kind of determine your experience. And so it's very easy to say like, I want a remote job, but what kind of remote job do you want? I think that's an important question that we all should be asking, because not all remote jobs are created equally in that sense. You have to understand what are your preferences and personal taste, and then what is this remote environment actually going to be. So that's something that I'm always kind of reminding myself. and also what type of work you're going to be doing. And so, for example, I've done some consulting where it was on customer support side, where you're doing a lot of ticket management. And so it was free and it was flexible, but I had to be in front of the computer, like in case tickets were coming in and people were messaging. So it wasn't as free as when I was doing consulting, working with startups, and it was a little bit more flexible. Yeah, that's like my quick thought about it, is just really understanding like what type of remote culture is it? Is it hybrid? Is it fully remote distributed? Is it going to be very time intensive where you have to be in front of the machine for a certain number of hours a day? Those are all things that normally we don't think about when we hear remote, but we should.
That's great. That's such an important distinction, because what I hear a lot from job seekers is a frustration when you're applying to a job. You know, a student will send me something, I applied to this, I haven't heard anything back, and I know they live in a certain country, and you know, in the fine print at the bottom of a job description, it's saying you must be located in this country to work. That's frustrating as a job seeker, but it's also a reminder to all of us to really read that fine print and understand what, I love how you put it, you know, what that role really entails, and if you have the experience or background to fill it. Katarina, before we started the call, you shared a little bit more about what you do at Remote, in terms of looking for companies that have headquarters in certain countries, but could be hiring anywhere in the world. And so I'd love it if you could share more about what roles you propose to those companies that they could be turning remote. What kind of, yeah, and what that process looks like, just to give insight on the back end, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. There's an interesting thing also to pick up on something that Wei just mentioned, which is what kind of role. Because, and I like to state this because sometimes the discussion around this topic gets very polarized, and we need to remind ourselves that obviously not every role can be done remotely. It's just not possible. There are some roles that are required to be done on site. Not to mention the company's policy and their culture, of course, because sometimes it is a role that can be done remotely, but the company decides that their culture requires the employee to go 2 to 3 times to the office a week, for example, and that's where you see the most when you see the job vacancy as in a hybrid. So it will be a little bit more difficult to hire someone in a different country if you're required to go to the office 2 times a week. But for the roles that can be done remotely, and you find a lot of them on LinkedIn, for example, remote job, and then you go and find, oh, UK only or US only. And usually, well, it could be 2 things. Mainly, one of them is legal aspects, and that's where remote can help, which is the company only has a legal entity in that country, which means the company is registered for taxes and compliance in that country only. So for them to be able to offer an employee contract, pay the taxes on it, offer benefits to the employee, they can only do it legally in that country. So my work is to hunt and find and do research on these companies that are looking to hire candidates. And they could be actually hiring them in other countries, but they don't know about this particular thing. They could use a service called Employer of Record that can help them do all of this legally in countries where the company isn't registered. So for example, a US company that is looking to hire developers or a customer support team in South Africa or in Nigeria, they don't necessarily need to register the company there. They can, obviously, if it's part of their plans for the strategic plans for the company. But if it's not, they can just use someone like Remote, the EOR service, and we take care of all the legal and compliance, sometimes boring bureaucracy around that. So what I usually say is, especially for people looking for a remote role, even students that are already planning on that, is don't look just locally. You might think that the company is not going to hire you because you're not in their country, but it might just be that they don't know. So you can also do that part. If you're really interested in that company, you can let them know, hey, did you know that there's a service called Employer of Record, and you can actually hire me in this country using that. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's just get informed, they have a meeting, they explore the subject, and they can hire the candidate. So that is the awareness that we try to bring in this matter.
That's great. And I know I love webinars like this because sometimes I feel like when we talk about remote work, it can feel like for people who are new to the remote workspace, it's like you're entering a conversation that's already been happening for a long time. So with webinars like this for our Nexford community, we're really trying to get back to the basics and help expand people's understanding and awareness of different opportunities. So here we're setting the stage. We've talked about what global remote work is, some considerations to keep in mind. There are a lot of legal and compliance things that factor into remote work that companies, that factor into their, like Katarina was saying, their strategic growth plans. So as a job seeker, you need to make sure you're staying aware of the fine print. So before we move into some best practices, I'd love to maybe hear what one benefit and challenge has been for you in your own remote career. I assume, I guess I'm assuming both of you, I know way you are, but Katarina, that you're fully remote, working for remote companies. So if you could just share something that's been really great about working remotely, and then maybe something that's been challenging.
Should I go?
Yes, sorry, Katarina. Sure, yes, thank you.
Okay, just one of each. Honestly, picking another thing that Wei just mentioned, which is related to global remote work, because right now I'm working for a fully remote company that is distributed in so many countries around the globe. So it is fully a global remote company. And I work with people everywhere. Just my own team, my small team within sales, which is the sales development team. We're in Turkey, Greece, Germany, Portugal, Spain, in the US also, Nigeria as well. So there's really a lot of people from all the places, and that is amazing for one to get out of its own bubble and learn more with interaction with all of these people. So for me, that is actually one of the things I treasure the most about working in such a global company. And of course, working in pajamas is also great. And one of the challenges you asked, right, Jennifer? I guess, what could it be? I mean, I think I'm going to mention a challenge that I think it could also be a challenge for when you're working in the office, which is self-discipline. And actually, especially when you have a flexible working schedule. So you're given the freedom to choose your own schedule to do your work. And as was it Spider-Man that said, with that freedom also comes a lot of responsibility. So you need to be productive regardless. So you need to master your workflow, your hours, when you're most productive, how you're going to track that, and how you're going to make yourself accountable for that, especially if you're working alone at home, which might be a little bit trickier than when you're in the office with the whole team. And then maybe you're pushing each other to do that. But that's also an advantage because you can follow your own workflow. So it's kind of both things. To you, Wei.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll just say, I feel like both of those it can be benefits and challenges. So there's like a different side to both of those. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love that. I appreciate these nice comments. I just want to make sure y'all are seeing them. People are saying they're enjoying the discussion and that they love this. So we're on the right track. But Wei, how about you? What's something that you, a benefit and a challenge that you've seen with remote work?
Yeah, so Katarina, you actually stole my answer. I was gonna say the same thing, like working in like a true global remote environments. It's so cool. Like I was working for this London-based startup called Hago, and we had people all over the world. So of course I'm here in West Africa. There were Americans, people from South America, Asia, of course Europe. So it was just interesting putting together like this unique group of really smart, talented people from all over the world, and it became its own thing. But if I had to say something kind of along similar lines, it's the fact that you also get to work on more global problems if you're in that type of environment, because you have people with different ways of thinking and different perspectives and different cultures. And so normally a group like that tends to want to tackle more global type problems and kind of think about the world in a broader sense, because there's that much more representation in the room. And so that's one thing that I found to be really rewarding, and also something that has stretched me professionally to think more about more than just my little corner of the world, and start thinking, oh yeah, like the world is a lot bigger than just the US or West Africa or wherever I am at that time. So it's that's something that I found to be like really rewarding. On the other side, and this is kind of maybe unique to me, but I struggle sometimes with the social aspect of remote work, especially when you've never actually met the people that you're, in person that you're working with. And so a lot of teams will try to do like Zoom social hour or like a coffee break where everyone jumps on the call and it's supposed to be fun. I personally never really find those that fun. I mean, they can be, but whenever I have a break, I tend to want to like get away from in front of a computer screen instead of trying to do something fun online. So that's been a real challenge for me. It's just how do you kind of break through that and build real relationships with the people you're working with, even though you've never met them and it's all virtual and electronic. So that's something that I wish was a little bit different, but I'm sure we'll think of something soon. Like things are moving so quick, they'll eventually we'll be able to make it feel more real.
We're all out here waiting for the metaverse to become a real reality for us.
Exactly.
I'll have to find, well, that's great. I mean, this brings us into our next like topic, which within this, which is best practices for successful global remote work. So the three of us, actually the four of us, my colleague Rashan, who's helping, we are all working remotely. There are a lot of benefits to it. There are a lot of challenges in terms of, yes, that discipline, and like our people are saying in the chat, like it's not easy to get these jobs, but we'd love to know like how you are finding success in the role. So Katarina, you mentioned having that self-discipline, the accountability, and we are working with people from lots of different countries. And I have found, personally, sometimes I feel like people, even though we're working across countries and time zones, and you could assume that you're working for a remote company, you're going to be really interculturally mindful and aware that that's not always the case. So what have you seen as a best practice in terms of communication across time zones or countries or cultures in your own work? And do you have any like tips and tricks for somebody who is starting out in a remote role, or maybe, when thinking of how someone can present themselves in a job interview to show that they'd be ready to be a good communicator in a remote role? And Katarina, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Jennifer, because especially when we're working in a global remote company, chances are that we will be working with people that are waking up to start their workday when we're going to bed, for example. So there might not be a lot of overlap in schedules to sync with them. And we do have that a lot at remote where I work. And so there are two things that I think are very helpful. One of them is you're going to be chatting with people all the time. Obviously, we use Slack as our main tool. And a very simple thing, don't start a conversation with someone with, hi, how are you? And then not say anything else, because they might reply in 24 hours or in 20 hours. And then they're going to say, hi, I'm fine. And you, and then for you to actually have the result that you're expecting from that conversation, it will take a very long time. So the best way also, so that person knows exactly what you want and they'll give you the answer that you're expecting, is to give as much context in the first message as possible. So you say, hi, how are you? I was looking to have a conversation about this, this, and that, or I have a question about this. I've already tried this, this, and that, or I've done my research on this and this resources. I didn't find the information I was looking for. Can you help me with this? So they have all the context, they know what you want, and they can give you a more complete reply as well for when you're available to read that reply. So that is an important thing to have in consideration. And another great tool that we use a lot at Remote, and a lot of other remote teams use too, is video. Because chatting is nice. A lot of people love it. Some people are not that much fans of writing. Also, like the tonality and the prosody of how you're speaking gets that doesn't show unless you use a lot of emojis, and maybe you might get a sense of how, if that person is smiling or not. But with a video, I mean, it's just like now on the webinar, you can see how the person reacts, how they're talking. So you can use any tool. We use Loom to record short videos to send to that person, and you build that communication. So I would say those two tips would be good ones to show that you can navigate the remote team environment.
I love that. I saw that tip somewhere of when you're sending asynchronous messages, or obviously, of course, when you're sending messages to colleagues, stop and ask yourself, like, how have I exhausted other avenues or channels to answer my question, so that somebody won't get frustrated unnecessarily thinking I haven't done the work on the back end. And it's made me stop in my typing tracks, because I'll say, I can't find this thing. And I think, okay, actually, did I look in all of the digital places where this document could be? And I think what you're sharing too, Katarina, brings to mind, you know, best practices in remote work are actually best practices in work, and whether you're in an office or remotely. So you know, the tips that you're hearing here, whether you might be in a job in a physical location, and it's probably going to help you there as well. So yes, the recording will be shared for those who are asking, and please keep putting their questions in the Q&A so we can answer them at the end of the call, or the webinar rather. So Wei, how about you? What do you see in terms of great communication practices, and if you have any example from your experience?
Yeah, I think especially when we talk about a more global environment where there are different styles and ways of working, I think for me, the number one thing is like having clear communication between yourself and the people you're working most closely with. Meaning, I actually use a one-pager, and it's like working with Wade. You know, I made this personally just so that people would know how I best work. And I found it to be like a really important tool, because I have like, these are the things that I typically do. These are the things I like. These are the things I dislike. These are my habits. These are the things I need to improve. And it does take a lot of like self-reflection to kind of look within and say, okay, I'm really good at doing this, and I know that I suck at written communication, or a video, I'm kind of shy on camera. Whatever it is, you have to be open and honest with yourself, and then share that with your team. And that immediately sets a baseline for people to say, okay, I have a better understanding of like, maybe I shouldn't message this person like first thing in the morning because they're not really a morning person, or etc. So it's all about setting expectations. And along with that is definitely your working hours. So even though you're remote, you should still give yourself dedicated working hours, and you can do that through Google Calendar if that's what your company is using. That's what I use at my company, and what I've used in the past. and you can kind of block off time on your calendar so people don't just fill it with meetings or try to contact you at a time when you're not working. That's very important. Otherwise, remote work will become your life and you'll always be working, especially if people are all over the world. So setting boundaries, setting expectations, and I agree that technology is very important. I'm also a huge fan of Slack. You can do timed messages where messages arrive at a certain time. So even though I'm writing and working now, I know that it's 3 a.m. for Johnny in California. I don't want to bother him at this point, and I can set it to arrive tomorrow morning for him. So video is huge. Like even I'm starting to. I've been posting on TikTok, and so like I'm really leaning heavy into video and the power of video to be able to reach people. And I think in a remote context, that's so important because you can get so much out of it, and people can go and rewatch that later, and they can continue to like learn and pick up on whatever you're saying. Audio too. So I think audio messages is another way to be able to reach people. Yeah, so those are my kind of quick takes on that.
I love that. I've seen this more and more in the this week even around writing your user manual. I'm just going to share in the chat. I've seen from Atlassian, who I believe creates Confluence, like instructions on how to create your user manual. And that's such a good idea for understanding how you work and then how you interact with others. And that's a super important element, especially when it comes to remote work. Companies want to hire people who have a high sense of self-awareness, because that's going to translate how you work with others. And that, of course, has a cascading effect on your team, your company, your work. So having that self-awareness, knowing what you know, knowing what you don't know, understanding how you work with other people. This is something throughout our courses at Nexford that we really try to integrate within our curriculum, is building that emotional intelligence and those muscles that are going to be transferable wherever you're working, but especially in this remote workspace. This is great. So you all talked about setting the boundaries. I love that. I'm taking out got some screaming behind me, the remote work. Setting boundaries and expectations, making sure you're giving context. So I'd love to know, we're getting, in the chat, people who are like, okay, let's get down to the really nitty gritty. I want to work remotely. Where do I start? Where should I look for these remote jobs? What skills should I be building to really be competitive? Like, I mean skills in terms of like, should I become a product manager, a software developer? I don't, we could go technical or non-technical. But what would you recommend if somebody just walked up to you and said, I hear that you do remote work things. Where should I turn? Wei, may we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's a ton of websites. Now, I can speak more specifically to Africa and everyone who's joining from the African continent. And we've already mentioned this, there'll be like a lot of places where you go and it'll be remote anywhere, but in reality, like when you check it out and you see the details, it's only specific to certain countries. And a lot of times those countries exclude the African continent for whatever reason. Now, I'm actually I have a list of companies that, or websites specifically that hire in the African continent, and they actively do that. And it's like true remote anywhere type jobs. I can share that, Jennifer, I don't know if I can share that with you, and maybe we can post that in a follow-up, but there is a list and it's starting to grow, right? So companies, I think the best companies are realizing that. And if they really want to be competitive, then they need to look everywhere and source talent from everywhere across the planet and not just in specific time zones. That being said, it's still very early. And so there's a long way to go before it's like full adoption where companies are just hiring from every corner of the globe and they're not really considering time zone, even time zone or what country or citizenship that you have. Until that time comes, there's a lot that you can be doing in order to better position yourself to be able to get a remote job and be competitive. And I think one of the skills that people need to bring to the table is, competitiveness, of course, but communication, I think, is huge. It is really adopting a sales mentality versus kind of like an applicant mentality. And so I see a lot of people saying like, and I've had conversations with people like, I want a remote job. I can't find remote work. Like, why isn't this working? And changing it from like what you can't control to what you can. And so there's a lot of different tactics and tricks that you can do, including things like video resumes. I found that in my career to actually be really rewarding. And not only that, when you're applying for a remote position, that displays that you have the competencies that are going to be relevant to that role, right? We just talked about how important video is in a remote context. And so if you're reaching out and applying and there's a stack of like 1,000 people who've applied to a job or like 500, but you're the one person that was able to find the decision maker, their contact information, and send them a customized video on LinkedIn, that is going to immediately separate you from the pack. And that's going to open eyes, and the person is going to say, hey, like, who is this person? And if you're in a location where maybe they haven't been thinking about hiring, they might, because they see that this person is really kind of innovative and they took the extra step to do something different. So there's a lot of things like that that you can do to really kind of separate yourself. And that's one of the things that I've been talking about on TikTok, and at my company, we're trying to encourage applicants to start doing, because if you are in one of those regions or locations that doesn't have the same access to remote work, you really do have to stand out in a different way than the typical applicant. And so that's, again, all the things that are relevant for sales, networking, communication, diligence, and just don't give up, because you can be sure that the people who are applying are going to keep going. And so you should too.
Wow, I feel like we could just stop the webinar now, but I know.
No, there's a lot more to talk about.
There's so much more to talk about, but you all are just sharing such rich insights, because this is the thing that I feel like I think we all hear and see online, and why I believe a lot, at least the three of us want to share our insights, is because you get this frustration from job seekers of like, I want a remote job, hire me for a remote job, hire me for any job, right? And people don't know if they don't know about what it takes to actually be a competitive applicant. And I really love this advice that you're sharing about flipping that mindset and thinking what is in your realm of control, because it does take a lot of reflecting and looking at like, am I putting forth the best materials? And even down to the level, like Wei, in your LinkedIn, you have the audio for how to say your name, and you even just use it for your name. You say it for your name, and then also, and here's what I'm interested in and excited about. And it's like, small, things like, well, it's not small, but I don't mean to diminish it. It's things like that, add to you and to add to someone as a compelling candidate.
That's actually a really sorry, not to hijack the conversation, but that's a really good point, is that I didn't mention is LinkedIn. And the platform is rapidly changing. I follow a couple of the product people that are pioneering kind of the new path for LinkedIn, so away from kind of like a virtual online resume to actually being a social platform. And I think for me, the biggest realization in the last 3 months has been that if you post on LinkedIn, even just a little bit, but I've been posting like 2 to 3 times a day, opportunities will just start to come to you. People will start messaging you. They will be like, what are you up to? I saw that you posted about this. Even the people who you think sometimes aren't actually, they're kind of silent watchers. They don't comment, they don't like, but I've had people message me 2 or 3 months down the line, like, hey, I've been engaging with your content. And I'm like, I've never seen you on my post or anything, but people are definitely watching. And if you're talking about what value you can bring to an organization, what you're passionate about, then opportunities will start to come to you. So that's another thing that I think is super important. It's more of a long-term strategy, but really building your own personal brand online and just demonstrating your ability will, it's free marketing, right? It's organic reach. And that will start to flip the script where you're not going out and having to apply for roles. People will come to you and saying like, hey, I think you actually would be a great fit for my organization. And that's like a huge game changer if you can start to see that happen.
That's amazing. I had someone once at the grocery store here in Malawi. He was like, "Oh, you're always posting this and that," and I was like, "I know you have never liked one of my posts. I didn't even
Yeah.
know." Yeah. So that's awesome. We have, I think, more questions for this webinar than we've ever had for any before. So Katarina, I'm gonna just hop now. So, and would love your input on some. We've got some thorny questions here. Okay, we don't have easy softball questions for this remote work webinar. We'll get into some of them here. What is your take on wage discrimination that's based on a remote worker's location? And yeah, I'm curious what you think, Katarina.
Yes, this is a very hot, tough topic. But yeah, basically we're talking about global compensation. And to be honest, I don't have a direct answer to this. I also have mixed feelings about this. So I'm based in Portugal, where minimum wage is right now at 700 euros, 705 euros, I think. When I started working was 485 euros a month, which wasn't that much for someone to live by herself as I was doing it. So I thought, if I keep having Portuguese jobs, this is what I expect. So, and this is when I started thinking, why can't I work for a foreign company that will pay me differently, that will pay me more competitive? Because I had a degree, but then I didn't have an amazing job, and then I was in search of this. So this is kind of my story, and that's when I started looking more outside of Portugal, and then eventually. Actually, it wasn't with remote. I started doing some transcription and translation work, mainly as a freelancer. And that's also when I started the remote working thing. And then eventually I found remote. And of course, I wanted a salary that people weren't paying in Portugal, or Portuguese companies weren't paying in Portugal. And why not? And one of the things is, why should our wealth be dictated by the place where we happen to be born? Like, we didn't choose the place where we were born, right? And where we built our roots and our community. But then again, the value of the money is measured by what you can buy with it, right? So it's not the number itself, it's how much that represents. So a salary of 1,000 euros might represent something in India, and completely different if you're living in New York City. So there's the cost of living to have in consideration. That is the whole topic. Also, the discussion goes around that, which is companies still need to be profitable and sustainable. So they will have to look at their budgets in a way that allows them to hire talented people, but still be able to grow and not bankrupt and close, and then everyone loses their jobs, right? So there's this balance to be done. And then, of course, there's companies that are play fair, let's say, and others that not really. So I don't really have a direct. There is a lot of information that Remote the company shares on the blog, and I can share some links around that global compensation, because it is really a hot topic. Me personally, I'm torn between this. The ideally is you can have a competitive salary despite where you are based, so you can still have a good life and not have to consider relocating to a different country just so you can make survive even. And I think that's the point of the whole thing of remote work, which is bringing opportunities to places where people wouldn't have that chance just because they were born there. So yeah, this is it. I would love to know what Wei has to say about it.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I definitely see your point. I think the way I look at, because I'm also now on the other end and actually trying to hire people and interviewing, so I kind of see from a different perspective. And I've always thought that compensation is an agreement between two parties, right? And so it's not just one-sided. It's not like the company dictates and gives this price and you have to accept it. I mean, there's the option to say no. And I do think that sometimes the conversation around like global compensation and not taking into consideration like where a person lives can actually be, it can have the unintended consequence of companies not hiring in certain locations because then their labor costs are more expensive. And even though what they would offer a person in that place would actually be higher than what they're able to find otherwise, right? And so I see the intention in saying that everyone should be paid the same price, the same wage, no matter where that they live in the world, but it can have the unintended consequence of actually limiting opportunities for people. And so for that reason, I'm more of an advocate for two parties coming to an agreement and both sides being content and happy with that. Because even internally, if we had to pay the people that we're trying to partner with the same rates that someone in the United States would earn, then we would be out of business and we wouldn't be able to operate. But a lot of times, and it's actually our goal is to pay above market, local market, right? Like far above local market. And in that sense, we're able to save. And then the person that we're working with, the contractor, the employee, is actually earning a greater wage than they would otherwise in their own market. And so it's a win-win. And so I'm very big on finding win-win solutions. And no matter what I do, it's just that sometimes it can be challenging depending on the part of the world that you're talking about. So that's kind of my take. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super nuanced, and I don't envy the HR departments who are managing these conversations, because also it's never an apples to apples comparison with cost of living and different life experiences and different, professional experience people bring to the table. So thank you for whoever shared that tough question, keeping us on their toes. Yeah, all of us, we're still on our toes. So we will share in the follow-up some great websites and platforms. We have a question here. What are the best websites or platforms for sourcing leads when working remotely? I think this question means how to identify remote jobs. So there, I know I can name a few. Flex Jobs, there's remote.co, I believe, or remotely. If you search remote job platforms, you want to make sure you're finding ones that don't have scams, that aren't asking you to pay money, to pay to play kind of thing. I know Flex Jobs does not have that. But while we're on the webinar, do you all just have maybe 2 or 3 websites that come to mind that you share with people that you could say, and we can also follow up by email with links? Yeah, wait, or you go ahead.
Okay, yeah, the one that comes to mind is I think they just changed names. So they previously were called AngelList, but then they just switched to WellFound. And so this platform is, if you're a little bit more adventurous, they're tailored to startups, so earlier stage companies, which doesn't mean, I mean, if you're unfamiliar with that term, it doesn't necessarily mean that like this is not a good company or that it's just maybe more unorganized. Startup just means that the company is earlier on in its journey as a company, so a newer company, which a lot of times is more exciting. And I have found so many interesting remote opportunities from this platform that are global. And so I spoke earlier about working for a London-based social media company, and I found that company through AngelList, which is now called WellFound. So here, let me see if I can find the link. That's probably the first one that comes to mind. Again, I have a list of like over 100 different remote companies that I'm happy to share with you, Jennifer, after this, and you can share that.
Perfect. And I just put a link. It's angel.co, and then it says that the name has changed to WellFound, so maybe they haven't changed the website yet. But Katarina, how about you? Do you have 1 or 2 sites that you love to send folks to?
I just share on chat. I think I send it to everyone. Some of the template I usually share with people that come to me on LinkedIn, asking for, I want a remote job. And those are some of the platforms. Also LinkedIn, you can actually choose remote, there's an option on the LinkedIn jobs section where you can choose either on-site, hybrid, or remote roles. So you can search for companies that are looking or offer remote, but again, read the fine print and make sure that they're hiring globally. Or if not, just inform them and let them know that they can. And sometimes it's just a matter of not having the information. So that'll be it.
This is incredible. I mean, I work remotely. I really at Nexford, one of our big pushes for 2023 is getting more remote jobs in front of our learners and alumni. So we will have our own Nexford exclusive kind of opportunities available. Webinars like this, if you know somebody who works remotely, I really hope you're reaching out to them to ask them how they navigated their journey. I'm already learning so much. I copied and pasted all those that Katarina just shared. This is such a great way to, and obviously kudos to everyone who is here on this webinar. You're investing your time in, really trying to understand how to navigate this global remote workspace. So really so thankful. So we answered that live, and we have, this one.
Can I also share just one thing, because the frustration is big and I understand. And I think that understanding that there are a lot more people looking for a remote role than the remote vacancies that actually exist, well, it's not that it helps to know this, but I think just to manage expectations, because that is the truth. There's a lot more people looking for a remote role than the remote roles actually available. And also that comes to the point that way you just share, you need to stand out from the crowd, because there are a lot of people sharing their CVs. So, and this is what I do every day as a salesperson, which is research the company you're applying for and personalize your outreach. So why would they want to hire you? What do you offer the company? What are your skills that would make you stand out and be interesting for them, and show that you know the company because you've done research. And then, yeah, a video might make you stand out. So just to manage expectations in terms of the numbers.
Right. I mean, I saw in the comments someone saying, should I post to random job sites or this and that? And to be honest, you're setting yourself up for disappointment if you use the word random in your job search. And I love both of you. I think this was unplanned, but Wei and then Katarina, you work in sales, Katarina, and Wei, you're talking about having this sales mentality of you have got to do your research. You have to treat your job search and landing these really competitive remote roles like a research project, and really getting, and with tools like LinkedIn, looking on their social media, on TikTok, on other channels, on Twitter, seeing who their executives are posting about opportunities or the company culture. While it's never been more competitive for these roles, it's also never been easier to do the research on the back end and really understand the company and their needs. So this is great. We have such wonderful feedback, about this useful session. That's great. I love it in all caps. I love a good all caps supportive message here. I'm copying the questions that you've shared, because what we don't cover, I'll be starting a career column on our blog so we can make sure to address them, because I know that I don't want anyone to be upset that your question wasn't covered live. We had a new learner session today. So as some of you, if you're already enrolled at Nexford, our courses start on the 1st of every month, which is something that makes us kind of unique. And we had a new learner orientation today for people who just recently started. And we got into the specifics of how to make sure you have a good CV, a cover letter, LinkedIn profile. And we do this on an ongoing basis for our learners. But we have both people who are pursuing their undergrad and their MBA. And we have a question in here of what kind of remote jobs can someone pursuing an undergrad degree apply for? And I wonder too, if either of you have experience with platforms like Upwork or Fiverr, and if you've seen that to be helpful in building a portfolio for maybe to be competitive for more full-time roles remotely. And Wei, maybe we start with you. And if we didn't run this one beforehand, so if you don't have something, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any experience with Upwork or Fiverr, or I can't necessarily speak to that, but I'm a huge believer in the power of internships. And I think especially in the remote context, if you're doing a lot of the things that we've talked about as far as marketing yourself and reaching out to people and being proactive, that it shouldn't be so challenging to get internships that eventually actually translate into a full-time role. And so I think companies and individuals are more likely to take, it's less risky for companies to bring on an intern than it is to like hire someone full-time. And that may be the way that you start. If you see a company or a position that you really like, you may start off as an intern. And then over time, as you demonstrate value and you do really well in the role, that can transition to something that's either part-time or full-time. So I think for a lot of people, I've seen, at least on my end, a lot of people coming to us saying that they want to work remotely, but they have no experience. And because it is so competitive, it's going to be super challenging to actually get a role if you don't have any experience on your CV or your resume. And so I think if you're at that point while you're listening to this, you definitely want to put yourself in a position where you get some sort of experience, including internship. Something is better than nothing, and I think things like Upwork and Fiverr, for sure, you can build your portfolio, but also interning is still a thing in a remote context.
That's great. We use a platform at Nexford called Forage, which is for virtual work experiences and practicums. So they're unpaid, but they give people insight into what working at those companies can be like. And I think when people are starting out in their career or are looking to build their experience, making sure that you are, like you said, Wei, adding your internship and volunteer experience so that people can see how you have the relevant and transferable skills for a different role. But let's see, I think we have time maybe for one more question. We're gonna have to wrap to respect everyone's time. So I believe, let's see. I think, yeah, let's see. What maybe if you could rapid fire, both of you share like what actual roles, like titles of roles are easiest, and if you can think of a technical and a non-technical that you have seen to hire for remotely. And Katarina, may we start with you?
Yes, definitely developers and backend engineers and data analysts are hot job roles, and when it comes actually to global compensation, these are even more competitive because, as Wei were saying, it's also a negotiations thing. So they have more power to negotiate this because the demand is so high, and the offer isn't usually as high, that you gain more power in this negotiation. And obviously, these are roles that you can do remotely, and that's one of the things we need to think about as well. And now I was also going to suggest. This is how I started out, and when you don't have experience, it is tough to go into the market and maybe leverage the things that might differentiate you from the rest of the people. For example, when I started out, I spoke 3 languages, Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So that already gives me a head start if they're looking for someone that speaks multiple languages, for example. So if you're going into sales or customer support, that is a huge thing. So you need to highlight that, and you need to make sure people know that you speak multiple languages. And perhaps I would say, but I don't see that these as much. Definitely is more for the developers kind of roles. But copywriting, for example, you can also do this remotely. You can do this as a freelancing role or as a full-time role. And for this, definitely have a portfolio, either on Upwork or on LinkedIn. Just write content, show it, and then you might not have the experience in a company, but you have the experience to show that you've actually built something. So you have something to claim I can do this kind of thing. So
And I hate to leave everyone hanging, but we have to wrap because we're at time. But thank you so much. Huge round of applause to our panelists. And I mean, we are going to have more of this coming. Keep an eye on your email for some upcoming sessions. Way's got the TikTok. We're all going to follow him. Katarina, your insights on LinkedIn are amazing. We will be TikToking with you. Look out for the follow on LinkedIn, keep those prayer hands up, keep the clapping coming. You all are great. Thank you for making for the time. I'm Jennifer Bongura with Nexford University. Here's to a great year of navigating remote work together. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.